I walked through the front door, exhausted after a long day at the office, only to find my stepmom, Jillian, waiting for me with her arms crossed and a stern expression on her face. Without saying hello, she thrust an official-looking document into my hands. A rental agreement demanding $800 per month. Since my dad passed away 6 months ago, things between us had gotten increasingly tense. But this was a new low. She was treating me like some random boarder instead of family in the home I grew up in. As I stood there feeling the anger rise in my chest, I knew something had to change. Before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and if you have ever dealt with difficult family situations like this, hit that like and subscribe button to join our community of real-life story sharers. Growing up in our beautiful craftsman-style house was something I always took pride in. My grandparents built it in the 1,950 seconds with their own hands, pouring their love into every corner of the place. The wide front porch, with its swing, the hand-carved banister on the stairs, the reading nook in the living room window, all of it felt like a warm embrace whenever I walked through the door. I was lucky enough to have my grandparents living with us until I was 14. They were amazing people, full of wisdom and stories. My grandfather taught me how to fix just about anything, and my grandmother made the best apple pie you could imagine. When they passed away within months of each other, it was devastating, but they left the house to my dad with specific instructions about what would happen to it later. My mother had died when I was just 5 years old. Cancer, quick and cruel. So it had been just my dad and me for most of my life. He did his best as a single parent, working hard as an architect, while still making time for my baseball games and school events. The house was our sanctuary, filled with memories of the people we had lost, but still loved deeply. Then Jillian entered our lives. Dad met her at a community fundraiser 5 years ago when I was 21. She was volunteering at the same booth, and they hit it off immediately. At first, I was happy for him. Dad had been alone for so long, and Jillian seemed kind and supportive. She laughed at his terrible dad jokes and encouraged him to take up hiking again, something he had loved before Mom got sick. They got married a year later in our backyard. I gave a speech welcoming Jillian to our family, genuinely hoping she would bring my dad the happiness he deserved. With her came her 2 children, Trevor, who was 15 at the time, and Megan, who was 13. Our quiet house suddenly became much louder, but it was nice to see it filled with life again. That was when things began to change. Slowly at first, so slowly that I hardly noticed. Jillian started redecorating, which seemed reasonable since she lived there now. But then family photos began disappearing from the walls, replaced by generic artwork she bought at home goods stores. The quilt my grandmother had made, that always hung in the hallway, was packed away because it didn't match the new aesthetic. Dad became increasingly passive, deferring to Jillian on household decisions. When I mentioned it to him, he would just shrug and say, "It makes her happy, and happy wife means happy life, right?" I tried to be understanding. After all, I was 26 now, working as a civil engineer at a firm downtown. I had moved back home after college, partly to save money for my own place, but also because Dad had started having heart problems and I wanted to be close by. I took the finished basement apartment as my space. It had its own entrance, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom. I paid for my share of utilities and helped with maintenance around the house, mowing the lawn, fixing leaky faucets, the things Dad could no longer manage easily. We never had a formal rental agreement. We were family. At least that was what I thought. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything. Dad had aggressive pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months at best. I took time off work to drive him to appointments and treatments, sitting beside him through the brutal rounds of chemotherapy that left him weak and nauseated, but did little to slow the disease. Jillian was often too busy to attend these appointments. She had her real estate career to focus on, she said. Her kids needed her attention. There was always some excuse. I bit my tongue, not wanting to cause my dad any additional stress during his final months. As he got weaker, I spent more time at his bedside. We talked about everything: his childhood, my future plans, memories of Mom. One evening, just 3 days before he passed, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Les, there are papers in the safe." You need to know, but a coughing fit interrupted him. By the time it passed, he was too exhausted to continue, and I was too afraid of upsetting him to press for details. I thought there would be time later. There wasn't. Dad died on a Tuesday morning in April. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. Jillian was downstairs making coffee. The funeral was a blur of somber faces and empty condolences. Jillian played the grieving widow, perfectly accepting hugs and sympathy with tearful grace. Extended family and friends filled our house afterward, bringing casseroles and sharing stories about my dad. Through it all, Jillian kept her arm linked with mine, presenting us as a united family in mourning. That facade crumbled as soon as the last relative left. It was like a switch had been flipped. Jillian became increasingly cold toward me, communicating mainly through terse text messages, despite us living in the same house. Her children followed her lead, their behavior growing more disrespectful by the day. One afternoon I came home from work to find Trevor had moved all his gaming equipment into my childhood bedroom. When I questioned him about it, he rolled his eyes and said, "Mom said, I could have this room now. Your stuff has been moved to the garage." Sure enough, boxes of my childhood memorabilia, sports trophies, yearbooks, the model airplanes Dad and I had built together, were stacked haphazardly in the garage, some items damaged from rough handling. When I confronted Jillian, she dismissed my concerns. "You have your own space downstairs," she said, without looking up from her phone. "Trevor needs a proper bedroom, not that tiny room he's been squeezed into." A week later, Megan used my mother's handmade quilt, one of the few tangible connections I had left to her, as a picnic blanket at the park. She spilled soda all over it and left it wadded up in the backyard where it was rained on overnight. When I found it the next morning moldy and stained, I was heartbroken. Megan showed no remorse when I mentioned it. "It was just an old blanket," she shrugged. "Besides, Mom says we need to stop living in the past." I retreated more and more to my basement apartment, trying to avoid conflict. I threw myself into work, often staying at the office late, just to minimize my time at home. Home. It was starting not to feel like mine anymore. Then Jillian began making physical changes to the house without consulting me. I drove up one day to find workers repainting the exterior, changing the warm blue my grandparents had chosen to a stark white with black trim. When I asked why I hadn't been consulted, Jillian laughed. "Why would I need your permission? This is my house now." Family heirlooms started disappearing too. The antique clock that had been my grandfather's pride and joy, the set of first edition books my grandmother had collected. Each time I noticed something missing, Jillian had an excuse. It was being repaired. It had been donated. It was taking up too much space. Then I discovered my grandparents' hand-carved oak desk listed for sale on an online marketplace. The listing had been posted from Jillian's account with pictures clearly taken in our garage. The description read, "Vintage desk minerware, $1.200 firm." That desk represented hours of my grandfather teaching me about woodworking. I still remembered the pride in his voice when he showed me how he had made the dovetail joints by hand. Seeing it reduced to a quick cash grab was the last straw. I confronted Jillian that evening in the kitchen. "Why are you selling my grandfather's desk?" She barely looked up from chopping vegetables. "We need to update the home office, and that old thing takes up too much space. Besides, we could use the money for renovations. That desk has been in our family for generations." I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You had no right to sell it without talking to me first." She put down her knife, then turning to face me with cold eyes. "I have every right. It is my house now. This house has been in my family for over 70 years, I countered. And now it is in my family," she snapped. "I was married to your father. Everything that was his is now mine. That is how marriage works. I thought of my father's last words then. Dad mentioned papers in the safe before he died. What did he mean by that? For just a moment, something flickered across Jillian's face. Concern, fear. It was gone so quickly, I almost thought I had imagined it. Your father was heavily medicated at the end, she said, turning back to her chopping. He said a lot of things that made no sense. Now, unless you want to start paying rent for your basement apartment, I suggest you drop this subject. But I could not drop it. That brief flash of worry on her face told me there was something important in those papers, something she did not want me to find. 2 weeks later, I arrived home to find Jillian waiting for me with a document in hand, a formal rental agreement demanding $800 per month for my basement apartment. She delivered a calculated speech about me being an adult who should pay market rate for housing. Trevor and Megan stood in the background smirking as their mother laid out her terms. If you cannot afford it, perhaps it is time for you to find your own place, she concluded, sliding the agreement across the table toward me. If you choose not to sign, I will have to give you 30 days' notice to vacate. I felt a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, grief. Part of me wanted to sign just to avoid more conflict, to not have to fight anymore. But a stronger part remembered my dad's words about papers in the safe. I need time to think about this, I said, taking the agreement, but not signing it. You have until the end of the week, Jillian replied coldly. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep before beginning my search. I started with obvious places: my father's desk drawers, his closet, the filing cabinet in what had been his home office. Nothing. Then I remembered how my grandparents had always hidden important items around the house. My grandfather had been particularly fond of secret compartments and hiding spots. I moved to the attic using my phone's flashlight to navigate through boxes and old furniture. In the far corner beneath a dusty tarp, I found what I was looking for: my father's fireproof safe. It was small but heavy, with a combination lock rather than a key. I tried the obvious combinations first: Dad's birthday, my parents' anniversary date. Nothing worked. Then I remembered how close Dad had been to his parents. I tried my grandparents' anniversary, the 12th of July 2049. The lock clicked open. Inside, I found exactly what I needed: the original property deed, my father's will, and an envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened the letter and began to read. Dear Les. The letter began in my father's neat architect's script. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've remembered our conversations about Grandpa's safe. I hope I had the chance to tell you about these documents myself, but if not, here's what you need to know. I settled onto an old chair in the attic. The safe opened beside me, my father's words bringing his voice back to life in my mind. The house you grew up in, the house my parents built, was never fully transferred to me. My parents set up a trust with a specific inheritance plan. While I had the right to live in the house for my lifetime, their will stipulated that ownership would pass directly to you upon my death. They wanted to ensure their family home stayed in the family for generations to come. My heart raced as I continued reading. I honored their wishes and maintained this arrangement. I never told Jillian about this specific clause because, frankly, I noticed her interest in my assets early in our relationship. I wanted to believe the best of her, but I also wanted to protect what my parents had built for us. Dad's letter went on, explaining his regrets and hopes. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger in standing up to Jillian. I saw how she pushed you aside, how she began erasing our family's history from the home, but I was weak. After your mother died, I was so afraid of being alone that I ignored warning signs I should have heeded. That's my failure, son, not yours. The final paragraphs contained practical information. Contact Walter Patterson at Patterson and Green Law Offices. He has copies of all relevant documents and has been our family attorney since I was a boy. The house is yours now, Les. Do what you feel is right, but know that both the house and my heart have always belonged to you. Love, Dad." I wiped away tears as I carefully folded the letter and gathered the documents. The property deed clearly showed the trust arrangement with my name, listed as the beneficiary upon my father's death. His will reinforced this explicitly, stating that the house and all family heirlooms were to pass to me. First thing the next morning, I called Patterson and Green law offices and scheduled an urgent appointment. Mr. Patterson was in his 70s now, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he recognized me. "You look just like your grandfather when he was your age," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I was wondering when you would come in." I placed the documents on his desk. "I need you to verify these for me and explain exactly what they mean." He spent the next hour walking me through each document, confirming what my father's letter had stated. The house legally belonged to me, and had since the moment of my father's death. Jillian had no claim to the property whatsoever. "Your father came to see me about a month before he passed," Mr. Patterson said, removing his reading glasses. He mentioned that Jillian had been pressuring him to change his will, to leave everything to her. He wanted to make absolutely certain that could not happen. "Did she know about this arrangement?" I asked. "No. Your father was quite clear that she was unaware of it. He asked me not to contact her after his passing, but to wait for you to reach out instead." He slid a business card across the desk. "How would you like to proceed?" With the attorney's guidance, I developed a strategy. That evening, I returned home with copies of all the legal documents and Mr. Minot Patterson's business card in my pocket. Jillian had insisted on a family dinner, likely to pressure me about the rental agreement in front of her children. As we sat down to eat, she wasted no time. "Have you made a decision about the apartment, Les?" "The agreement needs to be signed tonight." Instead of answering directly, I calmly placed the property deed and will on the table. "Actually, Jillian, there is something you should know." I kept my voice steady, despite my pounding heart. "This house does not belong to you. It never did. My grandparents left it in a trust that transferred ownership directly to me upon my father's death." The color drained from her face as her eyes darted over the documents. Trevor and Megan looked confused, glancing between their mother and me. "What is he talking about, Mom?" Megan asked. Jillian quickly regained her composure, forcing a laugh. "This is ridiculous. These papers are obviously fake. Your father left everything to me when we married." "That is not how inheritance works," I replied, sliding Mr. Patterson's card toward her. "You are welcome to contact my father's attorney, who has held these documents in trust for years. The house and everything in it that belonged to my family is legally mine, not yours." Mom Trevor's voice had lost its usual arrogance. "Is this true?" Jillian's shock transformed into rage. "This is absurd. I will fight this in court. Your father would never have done this to me. Actually, he would, and did," I said, remaining calm in the face of her anger. "And before you waste money on legal fees, you should know that these documents have been verified by 2 separate attorneys. The trust is ironclad." Her face contorted as she realized the implications. "You cannot kick us out. We have nowhere to go. I am giving you 3 options," I said, feeling a strength I had not known I possessed. 1, you can leave peacefully within 30 days. 2, you can stay and pay me rent at the market rate you were so concerned about. Or 3, I can begin formal eviction proceedings tomorrow morning. The choice is yours." Jillian stormed from the table, pulling out her phone. I could hear her in the next room, calling family friends trying to rally support. But as the evening wore on, she discovered what I already knew. Most people had seen through her facade long ago. Many of our family friends had been concerned about how she treated me after Dad died, and no one was particularly surprised by this turn of events. One by one, Trevor and Megan approached me, asking quiet questions about what would happen to them. I assured them I had no intention of putting them on the street, but that things needed to change. By midnight, Jillian's rage had given way to desperate negotiation. "Let's be reasonable. This was your father's home, too. He would want me to stay. What my father wanted, I replied, was for his family home to remain with his family. And for the record, he specifically wrote that he did not want you to have it. He saw how you were erasing our history even while he was alive. She tried several more tactics: tears, guilt, even offering to reduce the rent she had demanded from me. But I remained firm. "The house is mine," I said finally, "not yours. You have 1 week to decide which of my 3 options you are taking before I make the decision for you." As I walked away, I heard her whisper, "You will regret this." But for the first time since my father died, I felt like I could breathe freely in my own home. Jillian chose to leave. She and her children were gone within a week, taking only their personal belongings and what little furniture they had brought with them when they moved in. I discovered later that she had already sold many family heirlooms, including my grandmother's jewelry and my grandfather's vintage record collection. Through Mr. Patterson's help, I was able to recover some items by proving they were specifically mentioned in my father's will as family heirlooms meant to stay with the house. The desk was still in the garage, unsold, a small victory that felt enormously significant. Neighbors I had known since childhood stopped by in the days after Jillian left, many admitting they had been concerned about the changes to the house and my father's increasingly withdrawn behavior in his final years. My father's best friend, Frank, confessed that Dad had shared concerns about Jillian's motives for marrying him, but had been too embarrassed to act on them. He knew he made a mistake. Frank told me over coffee on the front porch, but he was trying to make the best of it for everyone's sake. "He was so proud of you for being patient through it all." Those words meant everything to me. As the weeks passed, I found myself with mixed emotions. There was vindication certainly in reclaiming what was rightfully mine. But there was sadness, too, for what my father had endured in his final years, and for the family bonds that had been revealed as nothing but a mirage. I threw myself into restoring the house to its former character. I repainted the exterior in the original blue my grandparents had chosen. I searched the attic and found boxes of family photos Jillian had removed from the walls, restoring them to their places of honor throughout the house. In the backyard, I tore up the concrete patio Jillian had installed over my grandmother's beloved rose garden and replanted roses in the same varieties she had grown. Each weekend, I worked on another project, feeling as though I was not just restoring a house, but reclaiming my heritage. My father's study became a memorial space of sorts. I displayed his architectural awards, hung his favorite landscape painting above the fireplace, and placed the restored desk, my grandfather's desk, by the window where the light was best. Sometimes I sat there in the evenings, feeling a connection to both my father and grandfather, drawing strength from their memory. The process of healing from betrayal and grief took time. I joined a support group for people who had lost parents, finding solace in sharing stories with others who understood the complicated emotions that came with such loss. I reconnected with extended family members who had been subtly pushed away during Jillian's time in our home, rebuilding relationships that had been important to my father. Occasionally, I heard updates about Jillian through mutual acquaintances. She had moved to a small apartment across town and was struggling to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. Trevor had moved in with his biological father, while Megan remained with Jillian. Part of me felt sympathy for them, especially the children who were merely following their mother's example. But I reminded myself that actions have consequences, and Jillian had made her choices. Rather than dwelling on bitterness or seeking revenge, I focused on moving forward. The house had always felt too big for just one person, so when 2 friends from work mentioned they were looking for affordable housing, I offered them rooms at a reasonable rate. Unlike Jillian, I had no desire to profit from people who were important to me. Soon, the house was filled with laughter again. We had weekend barbecues in the backyard, movie nights in the living room, and long conversations on the front porch swing. It became a gathering place for friends, creating new memories while honoring the old ones. I established a small scholarship at the local community college in my father's name, using some of the money I saved by not having to find my own housing. The Thomas Parker Memorial Scholarship would help students studying architecture, my father's passion. It felt like a way to extend his legacy beyond the walls of our family home. Through this journey, I learned that standing up for yourself does not mean sacrificing your integrity. I could have easily stooped to Jillian's level, been vengeful or petty, but that would have dishonored everything my family had taught me. Instead, I chose to be firm but fair, to reclaim what was mine while still treating others with basic dignity. I also learned the value of knowing your rights and legal protections. Had I not found those documents, had my father not been prudent enough to leave them for me, things might have turned out very differently. Knowledge truly is power, especially when dealing with those who would take advantage. Most importantly, I came to understand that family legacy goes beyond physical property. The house is important, yes, but the values my grandparents and father instilled in me, honesty, fairness, resilience, those are the true inheritance. And sometimes, the family we choose, friends who stand by us, mentors who guide us, communities that support us, can be just as important as the family we are born or married into. Today, as I sit on that same front porch where my grandfather taught me to whittle and my father taught me to draw, I feel a peace I had not thought possible in the dark days after Dad died. The house stands as a testament to 3 generations of my family, its walls holding our stories, its foundation strong, despite the storms it has weathered. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone who tried to take what was rightfully yours? Or have you experienced the painful realization that someone you trusted had ulterior motives? Share your story in the comments below.